All right, we're live.
Cool. So we are on for the new Wednesday live Q&A session. Welcome YouTube, welcome Facebook, and also now welcome Instagram. So I am really enjoying these new live sessions. We've started doing them a little bit more regularly. And I've got a question for today that is related to the topic of the video, and it's about contact. So before I start with that, I'll just explain a little bit what our agenda is today. So I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to give a little bit of probably background information that I think will help with this question, and also related questions to kind of bit contact, horses that are fussy in the bridle and having those sorts of issues. And also, if you have any other questions, I plan on being on for like 15, 20 minutes. So I'll take some time to answer this question. And then if we've got any questions that come in live as we're streaming here, I am more than happy to talk about those. And Julia's helping me out with this broadcast. So she's in the background kind of reading your comments so that I can focus on answering them. And if for any reason I'm not talking loudly enough, you can't hear me, okay, that's already an issue. I'll talk louder. And yeah, just let us know if there's any problems like that, and I will adjust. And I can see some of your comments coming in. So hi, Lynn. Thank you for watching. And hi, Lisa. Cool. I can actually see more of the comments this time. All right. I'm going to go ahead and read the question. So this is a question by Alicia, and she asked this under the blog video that I put out a few weeks ago about horses that carry their head too high and potential issues for a horse that's too high-headed. So Alicia's question was, I would love to see something on horses that drop their head to avoid contact. So basically the opposite problem. And what came to mind, what I think that you're describing, Alicia, is the horses that go really far behind. So like where you take a contact, and even if it's just taking a rein contact to ask for something, you know, like a change in speed and tempo or to steer. But as soon as you feel the mouth and you feel the bit, the horse basically drops their nose under, they kind of suck their neck back, and you lose all of the contact. So there's a few things happening there that we essentially don't want. So anytime the horse is sucking their neck in and bringing their nose back behind the vertical and doing those movements, especially together, they are going to be more hollow through their back. And then we kind of get into, if the horse is hollow in their back, they're not carrying themselves in a good weight-bearing posture. And when they're not in a good weight-bearing posture, it's not going to be as healthy for them long term. We're also not going to have a good even gait. Plus, with horses that do this, it can feel as though the head is kind of disappearing out from in front of you. And for a lot of new riders, this can be really intimidating too, because it kind of upsets the balance and it upsets the rhythm. So to understand what's going on in kind of this particular scenario, I'll give a little bit more background on the on basic learning theory and how that applies to our rein contact. So what happens where the horse inadvertently learns this response is through pressure and release. And pressure and release, the kind of technical term is negative reinforcement. So if you're new to learning theory, I love teaching it. I love the terms because I'm a little bit of a behavior and training geek. So a reinforcement is something that increases a behavior, and negative means that something that was a little bit or a lot aversive to the horse goes away. So how the horse usually inadvertently or accidentally learns to take their head, suck in their neck and take their head back and, as Alicia said, drop their head to avoid the contact, is because at some point in their training, the rider took the rein contact, the horse did this move, and the contact got released. Whether it happened accidentally, because if the rider's hands stay completely still, the horse can learn to do this, bring its nose in, and basically find the release there. Or some trainers will actually reward this. So they kind of are focusing too much on the neck and getting like a pretty neck and not really looking at the overall carriage of the horse. So the horse kind of arches his neck and the rider releases, And the horse learns that that's the response they should do. When they feel bit contact, they do this and they get the release. So how to correct it is you've basically got to keep the contact. You've got to keep the pressure on the bit, the bitless bridle, whatever. You've got to keep it on there until they do the better response that you want, and then you release on that. So it's about keeping the pressure, trigger the right behavior, and then release on that correct behavior. So if we think about first, just kind of a quick definition of what the correct behavior would be here, is that we want to see the horse when they take bit contact is stretching forward with the neck and having a soft, and being soft. So we don't want them to brace into the bridle. We don't want them to drop away from that pressure, but we want them to feel really soft and lower their head and have what I call the stretch. So basically the neck kind of going out and the nose going a little bit out and down. So to trigger that response under saddle, one of the easiest ways to do it is to get a little bit of lateral movement. So what I do when I have a horse that comes in with this problem is I'll first make sure that they understand moving their hind leg underneath their body. So can start it on the ground, just a simple, pressure where your leg would be slightly behind where your leg would be normally hanging, where you would take your leg to give that leg cue for the horse to move his hind. So just starting that on the ground, having them understand moving the hindquarters, and then doing it usually just like at a standstill. So basically you're doing a turn on the haunch, and then you can start to do it in movement. So like I'll be walking a circle, usually a smaller circle, like maybe 10 meters. I'll be walking the circle. I'll take a little bit of contact. The horse starts to go behind. I put on my inside leg and ask the horse to bend and to step under with his inside hind. As he gets that little bit of lateral or sideways movement, it'll kind of pop the neck back out, and then I release on that moment. So the truth behind that is it does take the skill in getting the movement. It also takes the kind of softness in elbows and in your contact, that when the horse goes behind, you can just kind of move your hands in a way, sliding back a little bit through the elbows and often kind of opening the hands that they no longer find the release when they drop back in there. Until you get the movement, you get the neck to stretch out, and then you release on that. So what we always have to think about as riders is we all have a plateau to our skill level, including me. So when you're thinking about training something with your horse and you reach kind of that plateau in your skill level, then you want to think about another way to work at it. So in that case, sometimes what I'll do if I have a rider that is not necessarily at that level where they can feel and initiate those movements from the horse and have the timing to release on the stretch instead of the horse sucking the neck back, then what you can do is just change the equipment. So there are times where a horse will have kind of developed some negative associations to the bit. So maybe if they were handled roughly, if they just have some negative associations around riding, if it was a rider with, very unskilled hands and kind of hung on the mouth, they can get really defensive. So when you take pressure, they're either constantly trying to get away from it or they're bracing out against it. Whichever kind of coping mechanism they've learned has worked better. And sometimes by just going to a softer piece of equipment, you can just work around the problem. So I've had horses that have this issue of really dropping behind, and when I put them in a bitless bridle, they're no longer triggered by that bit pressure, and I can work them in a better frame. They get the strength and they get that movement pattern of working in the better frame with just the bitless bridle that doesn't trigger the behavior. And then when I go back to the bridle, sometimes it's not even there, or if it is, it's much milder and it's much easier to kind of get them into that new way of moving. So I think that is hopefully kind of a complete answer to that question, Alicia's question about the horse dropping their head to avoid contact. I'm just looking at the notes, the different things that I wanted to comment on for that. So anybody that has any follow-up questions on what I just described or any other questions at all, it shows me a few of your comments, and then they disappear and I can't see them without going up and grabbing the iPad. So I'll let Julia relay your comments to me.
So most of our questions have come through YouTube, and everyone requested that when I say them, can you repeat them, especially since I'm not.
Okay. Sure.
Terry from YouTube asked, how do you deal with your horse when he puts his head up too high? That's the problem that she's having with her horse at the moment.
Okay, so Terry asked about the opposite problem of the head going too high. And Terry, I'll go through it quickly here. I have a video that will probably give you some more details on that. If you search YouTube for head too high, it should pop up for you. But the first thing that I think about with the horse that is head too high is, again, thinking about the whole body posture. If the head is high, the back is hollow. I mean, unless the horse is in a really advanced frame and level of training. But if the horse has got his head up, most often his back is going to be hollow. So with the back hollow, the first thing that I want to look at is there something that's making him uncomfortable that's actually causing him to go hollow? So for example, if the saddle doesn't fit well, or if the rider is in a position, for example, the rider's back is hollow and they're leaning forward and bracing in the stirrups, then that's going to cause the horse to be uncomfortable and go into that hollow position. The other thing can be anxiety. So if the horse is anxious and tight, he's going to go into that high-headed position. Or if he just doesn't have the training. So part of early training is teaching the horse to lift his back. And if he doesn't have that early training, he might also just have basically the movement pattern of going with more of the hollow back and the head high. So I try to look at them kind of in that order and then teach him, make sure he's comfortable, and then teach him to move a little better. So I just saw a few people, names that I recognize popping up. Hi, Judy. Hi, Bev. Thank you for being on. Any other questions that came in?
We have another question from Ella. She's also on YouTube. She said, how can I get my girl on the bit without stopping her going forward?
Yeah, great question. So Ella from YouTube also asked about getting on the bit without stopping forward movement. And the best answer is it's progressive training. And a lot of times on the bit is misunderstood as having too much to do with the bit. So what I mean by that is a lot of people think that in order to get the horse on the bit, it's a concept of like, kind of pulling them in and at the same time driving them forward. But really getting a horse like on the bit is about having a horse that is moving forward and freely and has a lifted back and is essentially just using their body in the best way for free forward movement while bearing weight. It starts with a young or a green horse just getting the forward movement. So getting that they're willing to go forward and that they are going forward without tension, which means that their neck is going to be dropped, their nose is going to be slightly out instead of behind, and they are going to be relaxed in their back and just moving forward willingly. So it has to start there. If you don't have that yet, if you find that, the horse is really high-headed or that they're going really tense, then you don't really even want to be thinking about on the bit yet. You just want to get this free forward movement with the relaxed posture first. And then what you start to do is teach the horse that when you take a little feel of the rein, even if it's just asking for a change in speed or asking for a turn, when you take that feel of the rein, that the horse softens their jaw. So literally like when you take a feel that they kind of lower their neck a little bit, soften their jaw, and again, do that lower and stretch forward. And once you have that, then you've got free forward movement. You've got that the jaw softens and the neck kind of reaches and goes forward a little bit whenever you take the bit contact. And then you can start to shape that into higher levels of frame and a horse that is going into generally more collection, which, just means more weight on the hind end. So another video that goes a little bit deeper into that is if you search on YouTube or on my website, crktrainingblog.com, for correct training of the dressage horse with Angelo Telatine. It's a little clip that I was in a lesson with Angelo that we were filming, and he talks about that specifically, is how to get that, how to think about using science-based learning to get on the bit. But it's a really good question, and I think for today, if I could kind of have one takeaway for you, it would be, if you're struggling with keeping forward movement as you take contact, make sure you really get the forward movement first, and then make sure when you're taking bit contact that you're getting a softening instead of a brace, and then you start to slowly put those two together. Any other questions that came in? We'll take one more question, and then I will sign off, and the recording is going to stay up here on Facebook and also on YouTube. So if you came in late, you can always go back. It usually takes it a little bit to process, usually not more than like 10 or 15 minutes, and then it'll pop back up that you can watch it.
This one is, I'm going to butcher their name if I try to pronounce it. Rosen, she's watching on YouTube as well. Mm-hmm. She asked, is it true that you can't teach an older horse to go on the bit? She said she's been trying to get him on the bit by pushing him into the corner with her leg and pulling slightly on the inside rein to get the bend. She said, but the horse won't go on the bit. He listens to leg yields, and she's even tried pushing him on the ground and using a whip with a slight pressure, but he still doesn't move over. She wants your help.
Okay, so question was, I think the first part about, can an older horse still be taught to go on the bit? And make sure I understand. So can an older horse be taught to go on the bit? And what you're struggling with right now is you're just not getting it, even trying, like putting leg pressure on around turns and trying on the ground. So yes, older horses can definitely learn to go on the bit. When we're talking about on the bit, or actually I like the term on the aids a little bit better, because it's really a whole body movement thing. It's not really about the bit. It's just a little terminology thing. But when we're thinking about this with an older horse is obviously going to have more time spent in like their normal pattern of movement. And also older horses, just like older people, are going to take a little longer to develop fitness, to develop flexibility. They're not going to change and adjust quite as rapidly as a young horse. So while they can absolutely change and they can absolutely learn to go in a different way, when we're thinking about change, what it's going to take to a certain extent, you just have to remember that with an older horse, you want to go a little bit slower and give them a little bit more time, allow more time to make those changes and adjustments. Again, I have a feeling that there might be some responses in there that you could think about training individually and making sure that they are individually working really well before you kind of put them together. So, for example, I would, and not knowing your horse, obviously not knowing him at all, but these are just some guesses. You can see what sounds like it could apply to you, is if you are on the ground and you just take a contact with the bit. So you just hold real close to the bit and take a little feel. What's his response? Like, does his mouth soften and maybe he moves his tongue and that means he's softening through his jaw? Or does he tighten up? Does he do absolutely nothing? Does he put his head in the air? So obviously the response that we would want is first just feeling that jaw softening. And then from there, if you're on the ground, does he have the range of motion? Like, just since you mentioned that you're working on getting it in the corner and working on the bending, does he have the range of motion in his poll and in his neck? Like, can you comfortably move and just ask for that from the ground? Or are there points that are maybe really sticky for him? And as an older horse, again, we think about, just like people, we have places that it's like hard to move it in that way because, we might get just a stiffer muscle, or again, just a repetitive pattern that we get used to. So can he physically just move in the way that you're asking for him? Is he loose? Is he soft in his movement in his poll and through his neck? And then going a little further back, if you like scratch under his belly, does he lift his back, or is he actually physically restricted there? If you go to his hind end and you give a little scratch down by his tail, does he kind of tuck his pelvis and also lift his back that way? So these are all things you can start to look at. Can he physically do it? And then as far as going back to the cues, like what does he do when you take the bit pressure? What does he do? You said you do the leg yield, so I'm assuming he understands moving, his hind leg in response to that. And that's the first two that I kind of put together. So if he's moving forward freely, he knows forward, he knows move the hind leg, and he knows soften the jaw and lower the head in response to the bit contact, then I just work on a circle and basically ask for stretching forward so lower the head and soften the jaw at the same time that I ask for step a little bit under. There's a moment in there where you get the back lifting and you get a little bit more of a back lift, really. You get a little bit more of that back lift, and then you soften on that. And again, it's looking at on the bit as the whole picture and focusing more on like the back and keeping the forward movement instead of looking at it as, what is he doing with his head and what is he bringing his head in. It's an important piece, but it's just one piece of that bigger picture to look through. So hopefully that helps. Again, I think the correct dressage training with Angelo Talatine would be a really good video for you too, just for a little bit more information on that. And I think we had a Facebook question come in that it only lets me see half of it right now.
I was hoping you were going to take one more. This one was from Karen.
Mm-hmm.
What's your
Julie is getting squeaky voice.
What's your opinion on hanging in the hand? Is it also lack of engagement of hind end, using the back correctly, and or lack of balance and seeking support, or both?
Yeah, great question. So it was what is hanging in the hand? So in my mind, and hopefully we're describing the same thing, as a horse that just kind of feels like his front end is like hanging on the reins, like he's just let his neck drop into the bit. So he's not actively stretching forward, but he's just kind of feels like his whole weight of his front end is hanging on the reins. So I have a horse here that tends to do this. Her name is Gray Molly. She's one of the lesson horses, and it can be both things. It can be a lack of balance as well as a lack of momentum and kind of too much weight shifted to the front end, which really it comes down to the balance thing. So what we do with Gray Molly is when she starts to get heavy, I'm more often coaching other riders on her than I am riding her myself right now. So what I'll do when I see her starting to get heavy with someone is I'll tell them to do lots of transitions. So I might not have a rider on that's at the skill level to, be thinking about on the bit and be thinking about asking her to stay steady in a frame and, lift her back. But what we'll just do is start doing transitions. So if we were trotting around, I'll say, do some walk trot transitions, change gears within the trot. We'll start going over some little poles. We'll start doing more turns. There's an exercise it's not an official name, but it's kind of ping-ponging around the arena. So it's basically just like if this is the arena, instead of following, our normal patterns of like figure eight, circle, follow the rail, it's just really taking kind of random movements around, and you hit the wall, and then instead of tracking along the wall, you basically come across, hit the wall, go off another direction, hit the wall, go off another direction. And why this can be useful for horses that get heavy is because when you get to the wall, you initiate the turn, always with the body first, but thinking about using more of the outside aids and outside rein to initiate the turn at the wall. And what the wall helps create is just like that one moment of the horse has to kind of shift back and balance at the wall to turn. And then when you get that moment, of course, you soften pressure, you soften your body. So you're reinforcing that moment of better balance as you're at the wall. So that's a really useful exercise that I use along with transitions to help the horse that gets really heavy in front to basically just shift their weight back a little bit and then not be so heavy. So I hope this was helpful. And hi, Shannon. Saw you just jumped on. I can still read your question since it's in the feed. Do I break horses here? I do. I call it starting. It's not a big deal, but I do start a lot of young horses. It's actually one of my favorite things to do because it's with a young horse that hasn't had a whole lot done. It's usually really, really easy. So yeah, I love working with young horses. All right. Thank you for everyone that's on Facebook, YouTube, also Instagram. These Q&A sessions are really fun. Again, we're starting to do them each Wednesday. So just keep an eye on the channel here. Feel free to ask questions that I can talk about next week. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day wherever in the world you are. So I'll see you again soon.